My name is John Cornish, and I'm a former football player who experienced a concussion. First, I'll talk a little bit about what I knew about concussions going in to the injury, and then I'll tell you about how I sort of recovered and the steps I found best in that recovery period. Football players are always having to deal with injuries, be it hamstrings, knees, shoulders. It's just part of the deal. However, concussions are an injury that no football player ever wants to have, and when they're dealing with it, they're sort of dealing with it by themselves. I knew this coming into my experience with concussions. I had only had a few hits that you might call severe ones, but I was cognizant of the effect that concussions could have on your brain, and I always wanted to take care of my brain, so I made sure that when I was going to get contact on the football field, I wasn't taking the worst kinds of hits on my head, rather than I was taking them on my body and wherever else I could. That was all fine and dandy until one day I had a run-in with an arm that was a little bit higher than I was used to, and it came across my head. When I received the arm bar up here, it's not a typical place you see arms. Normally you're hit around here, and when I saw this arm coming, I anticipated myself sort of just moving with the arm, because I anticipated the arm coming down a little bit to be a legal football hit and sort of slide off me so I could break the tackle. But that's not what happened. The arm stayed high, and I ended up sort of catching the arm, and I was accelerating at the time too, so I may have been passed out already while I was still in the air. And then I proceeded to hit the ground horizontally. So the back of my head hit the ground as well. Luckily, I held onto the football during that time, so I was happy about that. But it was, like I said, it's not an experience I necessarily remember. It's an experience that I don't try to think about too much, but in this point in time, many years since the injury, I'm able to talk about it more freely. The fact of having a concussion is always a surprise. If you have a concussion, there's always a few seconds where you're just, what just happened? In my case, it was about 15 seconds where there was no consciousness, and then I came to, I was in my football pads. I was wondering, what am I doing here? Why? I've never had a dream like this real. So I'm getting up, people are helping me up. I'm just like, what am I doing? Maybe I could have just got back up and got going with football again. But no, everybody was saying, John, just stay still, just stay still. I wasn't really aware of what had just transpired. Of course, everybody else in the stadium was. There was an ambulance on the field. Everybody was really worried. But instantaneously, I knew that, I felt pretty good. I couldn't really tell you what had transpired over the last 15 minutes, but I felt pretty good. So I'm escorted into the locker room under my own power. I'm able to walk and whatnot. We go in there and I sit down with the doctor. And the doctor asked me a few questions to sort of ascertain how I'm doing. And he asked me one question. John, did you score a touchdown today? And me, having thought that I hadn't even played a football game, I was in these pads for some reason, but I didn't really have any recollection of the game, managed to convince the doctor that I had not scored a touchdown. Only later did I understand that I fully convinced him that I did not score a touchdown, but in fact I had actually scored a touchdown. That level of disbelief, I think, is common with concussions, where your sense, the patient's sense of their injury, is not on the same plane as everybody else that saw the injury. For me, post those few moments, I realized something had happened. So I wanted to take steps to feel as good as I could, as quickly as I could, so I could get back on the field. So I was removed from play. I had to take a bunch of different tests to see how I was doing. But the fact was, I had scored better on the SCAT exam after my injury than before. Now, some football players tried to game it and have a bit lower score intentionally. I always tried really hard on that, so I was really surprised to see those scores. However, I did have one issue that didn't sort of go away. I was dealing with a headache that I just couldn't shake, and so I was recommended rest. And I took that time to just hang out in the dark room. I spent a lot of time meditating, reading when I could, and didn't really have too much time in front of the television. But I quickly got bored of that, so I only spent about 2 days resting before I felt I could get going again. I had the opportunity to meet with a bunch of different doctors who I think in their ensemble were all able to help me get back on the field. Dr. Catherine Schneider helped me deal with some of the issues I was having with the headaches. And also I had sort of come aware of an issue with binocular vision with my eyes, and that was something we needed to take special care of. I ended up wearing a pair of glasses with prisms for a period of time so I could still look at my computer screen at work when I returned to work outside the football field. I also had the opportunity to meet with a psychiatrist. I thought that was very important in my steps to recovery, because it wasn't necessarily so much that my body was, something was existing that I couldn't return to sport. More so, when I returned to the locker room, I would sweat profusely. I would get really anxious, and I couldn't really overcome that until I had to sit down with a psychiatrist, and she was able to sort of guide me through some of my emotions, how I was thinking, how the sport had affected me, and how to overcome those and return to play. I think my recovery period was long. I think I took 8 weeks away from play. And during that time, I had about 6 weeks away from the football field. And I think that was for the best. I know when I returned, I was able to overcome all the issues I'd had. And actually, I returned and ended up leading the CFL in rush yards that year. So it ended up not being too much of an impediment to my season. We also won the Grey Cup after that. However, I still had in the back of my head that I was now putting myself at risk. So when I first suffered my concussion, I was dealing with everybody telling me to just sit in a dark room indefinitely. And as I mentioned, that's not necessarily how I felt I wanted to proceed with my recovery. Science has changed, though. The now consensus is that you'll take some rest and then return after a few days. And it's just evidence, I think, to show how fast moving concussion science is these days. When concussions first came out, you could say, oh, you just hop back in there. And obviously at this point we have a lot more information. But I think it was sort of the team approach that was taken towards my recovery that was one of the most beneficial things. You had a bunch of different minds inputting their own thoughts, and that allowed me to sort of move up in this category, move up on that score. And over time, that's what resulted in my return to play. So what I realized during all this time, with all the help of the doctors, I still needed a few pieces in place in my own life to help my recovery be as swift as possible. And the number one thing I found in that regard was the support of your friends and family. It's very hard for other people to understand what's going on when you have a brain trauma. It's not something that a lot of people have experienced. For most people, thinking clearly is just part of the deal. But once you have a concussion, you might lose that, your headache is too much, you can't sleep. Whatever your symptoms are, it is just important that you have the support of your friends and family. As well, you have to be internally motivated to get better. I think for me, understanding the situation I was in and being a competitive person wanting to get back on the field, I made sure that I took steps to sort of get past my baseline. When you're playing football, you injure a muscle. You never work it back to the original condition. You always want to improve it past its original condition. So that's what I sought out to do with concussion. So I definitely tried to meditate a little bit more, eat better, and then ensure that I was always doing the best things I could in terms of sleep, because I found that sleep was something I lost a little bit of while I was concussed, and then having to get a lot more sleep was a huge benefit as well. I do feel that when you're surrounded by people that are trying to help you, friends, family, support staff, doctors, it just makes your recovery that much easier. And everybody's concussion symptoms are different, but I think when you have those things in place, friends, family, support, doctors, it makes recovery that much simpler. I'd just like to say that sport's constantly evolving, and as people become better athletes, as this level of play becomes higher, you're going to see more accidents, more injuries happen. And I think it's people like yourself that are working hard to understand the science, to improve upon the science, that are really going to make a change in the world of sport.